This is the lecture for European history for Thursday, the 16th of December 2021, and tomorrow is the exam of unspecified length and mysterious character. So, today's lecture will bring us to the end of not World War II, of the Napoleonic era. So, Napoleon has conquered Europe east of Portugal and Britain and west of the Russian Empire. And as master of Europe, he has employed nepotism to place his relatives in key positions so that those relatives will be absolutely loyal. Joseph Bonaparte in Spain, for example, has no illusions. He has his job because his brother gave it to him. And if anything bad happens to Napoleon, Joseph Bonaparte is toast. So, this is the kind of loyalty that one gets with nepotism when you hire or promote incompetent relatives because they will be loyal. Now, we have talked about the Napoleonic Code of Justice, but I will reiterate. In the United States, we follow English common law, a tradition of law rooted in the concept of precedence. There are codes of laws that governments promulgate in Britain at one time and in the United States, but the role that judges play, that judicial decisions play, those pockets are empty, except for one person or two.
There's two of us.
Two.
Me and Con.
Two people.
You may want to put your thing in there. Was that your phone? Was that a phone going on?
No.
Oh, I thought I heard noise.
No. My phone's in my locker.
Okay. That's fine. That's okay. Obviously, I'm losing my mind. It's possible. This is the season. So, the idea of a judge making an important decision in a case that will shape analogous cases, similar cases, into the future is at the heart of our law. In English common law, which develops into American law, a person is presumed innocent until they are proven guilty. If they are proven guilty, at that point, they're guilty. They're seen as guilty legally, morally, and so forth. But during the trial, the duty of the prosecution is to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt the guilt of this particular person for this specific crime with evidence. Therefore, guilty people walk. They do not go to jail sometimes in our system because our system is oriented to protect individual rights, even at the expense of the social good, even at the expense of allowing guilty people on the streets, because we would rather, in theory anyway, see 10 guilty people walk and not go to prison for crimes they committed than to see one person who is innocent serve a prison sentence or be punished for a crime they did not commit. This is different from the Napoleonic Code. The Napoleonic Code, which governs most of the non-communist world, is rooted in Hammurabi's Code. It's rooted in the 12 Tables of Rome. It's rooted in Justinian's reorganization of Roman law. It's rooted in medieval monarchical law. And it reorganizes all of these things to the benefit of society. So, in Napoleonic Code justice, the accused has a greater duty to demonstrate their innocence. Doubt in an American courtroom tends to favor the defendant because the prosecutor has to demonstrate guilt. In a Napoleonic Code court, doubt might favor the prosecutor if the defendant cannot demonstrate a clarity of evidence that demonstrates they could not have done it. Yes?
This is just a question about the innocent until proven guilty. So, Kyle Rittenhouse was put in jail for 87 days. So where does that innocent until
He was there not as a prisoner, he was there for his trial. He was not sentenced to jail. Had he been sentenced to jail, he would have gone to jail after. His time served might have been counted against his sentence. It might not. Depends on the judge, depends on their interpretation. Oftentimes, if you serve something like 87 days in jail as your trial is going on, those 87 days will be taken out of your prison sentence. But since Mr. Rittenhouse was not found guilty, which to the extent I understand the case I think is quite reasonable, personal opinion, he has no prison sentence from that to be deducted. He doesn't have a right to sue the court because the court is doing its job. He was accused of a crime, there was a grand jury, he was indicted, and he was held. Now, was he held without bail, or did people choose not to pay that bail, or what? I don't know. If he was held without bail for an unreasonable thing, but murder is usually is something that oftentimes you can be held without bail for. He can sue people who defamed him in the press, current president, and maybe a court will agree that they defamed him, that they declared him guilty before his trial was over. But he does not have a right to sue the court for holding him in prison during his trial, not unless they broke the law when it came to setting his bail. Okay. So, thank you for asking. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a legal specialist. There are people in this school who know far more about it than I do. I do my best as a historian. So, if a guilty person is accused of a crime, and in the United States, a defense attorney discovers that person's guilt, in no way can that defense attorney compromise a not guilty plea. In the United States, we employ a variant of what worked in the Middle Ages, trial by combat. In trial by combat, members of the aristocracy, if they were accused of a crime, could go into battle or select a champion to go into battle against a representative of their accuser. And they would literally have a fight with weapons, on the belief that the Lord God Almighty would not allow an unrighteous person to win such a fight. You can understand just how scary that idea is, because what it meant was that bullies never got convicted unless they were, if they were really good at dueling. And there were people who were utter scum who were really good at dueling, fighting sword fights, fighting with pistols, whatever. They enjoyed it. It was a thrill sport to them. In our system, English common law, the lawyers are gladiators, they are sword fighters, they are knights fighting a duel. But instead of fighting with swords, they're fighting with their knowledge of the law. They're fighting with their ability with rhetoric to persuade the jury, to consider there's a possibility of doubt. They are, in some cases, where video evidence is there, trying to tell people, don't believe your eyes are lying to you. Believe me, because that camera footage is taken out of context. A defense attorney that reveals the guilt of his client is going to be disbarred. In other words, forbidden to practice law. And probably they will be tried and convicted for breaking their professional duty, and they will go to jail. In the United States, in no way, shape, or form can a defense attorney try to protect society. If a person is found is being tried for murder, one murder, and the lawyer discovers, the defense attorney discovers, this is a mass murder. This is a mass murderer who has killed 50 or 60 people, and no one but the lawyer knows it. The lawyer is not allowed, because defense attorney privilege it's based on the privilege that was in the confessional. When a person who is of Christian faith in the Middle Ages and of Roman Catholic faith today tells a priest he did something, the priest is forbidden to go to the authorities. What a good priest will do is say, if you genuinely want absolution from God, you need to go to the authorities. You need to admit to your crime. You cannot live a righteous life in denial of the guilt that you have. But the priest cannot righteously out the criminal, reveal his crime, nor can a defense attorney. Even if the defense attorney wants to drop the case, if he does so in a fashion that's prejudicial, that says to the jury, the defense attorney is leaping on moral grounds because he's not, that still could be enough to get the lawyer disbarred and thrown in jail. So our system, English common law, intensely and repeatedly says that the rights of the accused are as or more important than the rights of society to be protected. Because at some point, any of us might be accused. That's the decision our founders made. That's something that evolved in England. Most societies in the free world do not accept this. So in a Napoleonic Code courtroom, if the defense attorney discovers that the client is guilty, he should not go for an innocent plea. He's engaged in something legally dangerous if he does. What a defense attorney should do is go for the plea of guilty with extenuating circumstances. You don't deny that the crime was committed. You place the crime in a context that exonerates your client. Yes, my client hit this person with a car. It's a terrible thing. But this person was waving a sign as part of a protest and started beating the car with the sign. The client was afraid for his life, that the mob would be able to break through the windows and drag him out of the car, and so my client accelerated and ran over that guy. Guilty with extenuating circumstances. In France, they have an entire court devoted to crimes of passion, because it's France, the land of love and lovers. And a typical crime of passion is, Maurice comes home from work one day early because he's gotten a promotion. I've told you the story. And he finds Clarice in the bedroom making noises with a man that shouldn't be made unless Maurice is there. And the next thing that anyone knows, Maurice is standing there holding a smoking shotgun with both of them dead. Is Maurice guilty of murder? Well, yes, he killed people. But was it premeditated murder, which is murder one, which will get you the guillotine, or would have gotten you the guillotine back in the old days? No, probably not. If what happened was Maurice came home, saw this, and then had a visceral, primal ape reaction, kill them all, it may not be murder even, it may be manslaughter. He caused the death of people, but it was a genuine case of temporary insanity. Now, the court in France is going to look very hard at things to try to spot baloney, to try to spot lies and sophistry and all that stuff. But still, there are cases where otherwise civilized people see red, it's what it's called. It's like having a flashback if you've ever served in combat. Make sure you have your notes out. And that flashback is you're suddenly back there, and you react like you're back there. I'm not a very violent fellow except in self-defense. I carry a gun in case I need it, but I'm not a very violent fellow. But when my wife and I were girlfriends, and when I had just finished writing my thesis, my senior thesis, 55 or 60 pages on the Russian Civil War, an element of the Russian Civil War, I was not sleeping normally after that day. I was tapped out. I hadn't slept in 3 or 4 days. And I was in my dorm room, and she was there to, be with me, help me celebrate. And she made a noise, and in my dream, I still remember the dream very carefully. I was in a gypsy caravan, and there was a guy, I was in a carriage, and there was a guy coming at me with a knife. That was the dream. It was vivid. And I have nightmares that cause me to get up and move around the room sometimes. So I reacted like there was a guy coming at me with a knife. Well, it was Tina coming to comfort me because I was having a nightmare, and I slugged her. It's the only time in all the years we've been together that I ever did that. And she understands that I didn't slug her. I was in a dream. That was not my fault. we have since worked out how to be around me when I'm having a nightmare, and usually it's duck and cover, which is what I want. It's just the way I'm built. Most people, when they're asleep, their body control is cut off from their mind, so they don't act out their dreams. Sometimes I do. Sometimes it's scary. But that's the only time I ever connected, because she didn't know yet, and I didn't know yet how bad it could be. So a crime of passion, guilty with extenuating circumstances, might not result in a punishment, but nobody's going to deny that the thing happened. So that is different. In a Napoleonic Code courtroom, guilty with extenuating circumstances is what a defense attorney would go for if he knows the client is guilty. Did you have a question?
Yeah, my dad, when he's ever having a nightmare, I used to do the same thing, like, before I got diagnosed. I would, like, go to the top of the stairs and take the gate off of its, like, hinges, and, like, I would throw it on the stairs. And I would never actually throw it, but I would pick it up, and my mom would yell at me, and I'd be like, I'd set it down, I'd put it back on the hinges, and then I'd go back into my room. But,
it's good that you didn't actually go down the stairs. Yes. That's very lucky. Now, I have a second floor in my home, and I made sure to install a door at the top of the stairs that whenever I'm sleeping upstairs, I close the door, because I don't want to ruin my body by having a nightmare and suddenly realizing I'm in midair because I've run off the top of my stairs, and then, no, I don't want that. So, yeah, you take steps. And the gate was probably there to get you not to do that, too. Okay, got to move on, unless there are other questions. Okay, so the Napoleonic Code is something that still exists. Like Alexander the Great's concept of Hellenism, the blending of Greek and Persian culture's best elements, Napoleonic Code justice is still very much alive and well in the world. Do you know if Lithuania uses the Napoleonic Code?
I don't.
Okay. Do you know if your relatives in Russia? I mean, Putin's made things a little different. Yeah. So, never mind. At one time, though, under Tsar Nicholas I Romanov, the Russian Code of Laws was updated, inspired by several Napoleonic Code ideas. But when the communists took over, that was all gotten rid of. Okay, finally, the Continental System. Napoleon hates the British because the British are this enemy that he can't beat. Because to beat them, he has to cross the English Channel, and the British after Cape Trafalgar rule the waves, and there's nothing he can do about it. So what he can do to this nation of shopkeepers, which he contemptuously calls the British, is he can set up a system that bans trade with Britain. So no one in French Holland or French Prussia or French Spain or French Italy or French Illyria, which is today Croatia and Slovenia, no one in those French-controlled regions are allowed to trade with anyone connected to Britain. But the European continent can't produce sugar. It can't produce cocoa. It can't produce coffee. And it can't produce tea because it's too cold. And Europeans have come to love all of those things, among other things that come from the wider world, like bananas. Can't grow bananas in Europe. So what do people do? They do the same thing that Americans did when a teetotaling majority in the country made a constitutional amendment saying that drinking alcohol was unconstitutional. Well, that was fun. Yep, that's called prohibition. 1919, the United States bans this production and sale and consumption of alcohol. So everyone in the country stopped drinking, right? No. No, what we do is we develop organized crime from neighborhood street gangs and ghettos like the Italian Black Hand into interstate organized crime families that rival the government sometimes in power. There were times when Al Capone had more power in Chicago than the mayor of Chicago did, because Capone ran the gangs there in the 1920s. So Napoleon makes it against the law to trade with the British, but people still trade with the British. And when Napoleon's people can prove it, they punish. But it's not enough to stop. What are you going to do? Take a coffee drinker off his caffeine? You're going to take a person who loves sugar, cane sugar candy off their candy once they develop a sweet tooth? No, they're going to get the shakes, the bed spins, the sweats. It's not going to be good. It's going to be bad. Like any addict, they're going to go through detox. It's not fun. So Napoleon is frustrated in this attempt to control trade. Yes?
Who was the president in 1919 with that?
Woodrow Wilson, who is my least favorite president in all of history ever. Now, there is something here which I didn't have, but which is necessary to talk about. Thomas Jefferson, a Francophile, who had been once the ambassador to the Revolutionary French. Thomas Jefferson, who wanted the early United States to get involved in the wars with Britain on the side of revolutionary France. Thomas Jefferson is now President of the United States after 1801 for 2 terms. And Jefferson looks west of the Mississippi, and he sees a land claimed by France, the Louisiana Purchase. Its base and its capital is the city of New Orleans, near the mouth of the Mississippi. Napoleon looks at the map and says, boy, that Louisiana, wonderful place that we'll never get to control, because the British will cut it off and invade it, and then it will be British territory. The revolutionary Thomas Jefferson and the revolutionary Napoleon Bonaparte send ambassadors to one another to work out a deal, to stick it to the British. And the deal is that the Americans will pay pennies on the acre for the entire Louisiana Purchase, which is everything from the Mississippi River to the Continental Divide, including right up to the border of Idaho. So, gosh, we get to double the size of our country and move towards a from sea to shining sea, imminent manifest destiny republic, because the French can't keep control of Louisiana, and Napoleon at least gets paid for the land. It's a win-win, except for the British. They don't like it. But this happens because of the Napoleonic Wars. Another thing that happens that's going to be important when we talk about Unit 3, South Africa, near Cape Town, the very tip of the Cape of Good Hope, is inhabited very thinly by wandering nomads called Bushmen, or Hottentots, or Xhosa. The Dutch in 1600 set up a colony there. And for 200 years, the Dutch thrive in what becomes known as the Cape Colony. They have slaves. Their Dutch varies from European Dutch and will eventually become the language Afrikaans today. And the Bantu peoples begin to move towards the Dutch, and there are a series of struggles around the edge as people from Central Eastern Africa move south. And the Zulus, well, the Zulus aren't a big deal yet. But in 1800, the British take over the Dutch colony of Cape Colony, South Africa, because the British know that Holland is under Napoleon's rule, and they don't want Holland to have any chicanery that's going to interfere with the British ability to control that important piece of water south of Africa. So the British take possession of Cape Colony. And this is going to be a basis for a lot of the South African history I'll be telling you next unit. Okay. The Continental System is actually going to be the bone of contention that Napoleon is going to use as an excuse in 1812 to invade Russia. Because Alexander, Tsar of all the Russias and autocrat of all the Russias, Alexander Romanov, Alexander I, refuses to go along with the Napoleonic Continental System. But before that, let's talk about Spain. You know, Spain has been sort of sleeping since the mid-1600s. It's a country that has lost a lot of its verve and vigor, and it basically is holding on to its American colonies. And anyone with any get up and go goes to Chile, because in Chile, for 200 years, near the island of Chilo and the city of Puerto Montt are a tribe of Indians called the Araucanians. And the Araucanians fight the Spanish successfully to remain independent for 200 years. So anyone in the Spanish military or colonial organization that wanted to challenge themselves, they wouldn't go to the Philippines. They wouldn't go to Mexico. They wouldn't go to Colombia. They would go to Chile because there's a hot war there for 200 years against these incredible Indian fighters. But except for Chile, for the most part, Spain's empire is sort of stagnating. And when there is a crisis in Spain, Napoleon takes the opportunity to make his brother Joe the king. And Joseph Bonaparte begins to try to do to Spain what the revolutionaries did to France, including reduce the power of the Roman Catholic Church. Let me tell you something about Spain, at least before the very, very, very contemporary moment. Spain is defined by its Catholicism. Spain, remember, fought a 700-year Reconquista war against the Muslims. Spain was so Catholic it kicked out the Jews, as well as the Muslims, in 1492, or oppressed them with the Inquisition. Spaniards, for the most part, are deeply, deeply Roman Catholic, especially at this time. Joe Bonaparte incites the Spaniards by insulting their customs, by insulting their faith, by implying that the Spaniards are backwards and that the French have everything to teach the Spaniards. Think about how obnoxious that would be. And by taxing the Spaniards more and more and more to pay for French armies' adventurism elsewhere. So the Spaniards begin to fight what's called a little war, or guerrilla, which gives the English language the term guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is not warfare wearing bright uniforms with shiny brass buttons and straight lines and volley fire. Guerrilla warfare is, and you know it because we've talked about it sort of before, it's when people, just like everyone else, suddenly come out of the woodwork and kill a French official, or kill one of Joseph Bonaparte's officials, or steal a payroll filled with gold, or burn down some important government buildings, or make it impossible for the government to govern. Spain, not the government, not the ancien regime in Spain, but the people of Spain, rise up as a nation and start to fight against the French. And the French don't know what to do with this, because the French see themselves as servants of the people. They see themselves as freeing the Spaniards from the medieval superstitions of Roman Catholicism. They see themselves as heroes of the people. And now everyday people, women and children, are risking their lives to kill Spanish soldiers, to kill French soldiers. So Napoleon sends an army into Spain under one of his marshals. And the Peninsular Campaign is going to be fought. This is like Afghanistan was to the Russians in the 1980s, or Vietnam was to the United States in the 1960s and 70s. Both Vietnam in those days and Afghanistan in those days involved a very powerful foreign army coming into a land that it didn't really understand and getting bled white. The Spanish campaign, the Peninsular Campaign, costs the French casualties, and there's no hope of victory. Because ultimately the people of Spain, like the people of the Vendée back in France, refused to be governed according to this new revolutionary system. However, unlike the people of the Vendée, the people of Spain are a nation, and there are a lot of them, and they can actually fight back, especially since they have help from the British. The British send an army to help the revolutionary Spaniards under Sir Arthur Wellesley, who later becomes the Duke of Wellington, who's going to fight Napoleon in a little while. So the Peninsular Campaign is this running, bleeding sore in the French Empire that nothing seems to staunch. It's like having a bloody wound when you're a hemophiliac. The blood does not clot. You can put bandage after bandage, but it just keeps bleeding.
Yeah, the thing about fighting insurgency, which this pretty much was,
You betcha.
is if it's dedicated, and they're not going to quit. Being the counterinsurgent forces, you're not going to win. It's almost impossible to win because if it's the entire nation you're fighting, killing some of them isn't going to do anything because there's still the rest of the nation.
No, in fact, you're making martyrs for the rest of the nation to rally around. No, fighting an insurgency is really difficult. Luckily, making an insurgency is also really difficult. Mao Zedong, the Chinese communist dictator, liked to talk about People's War as if it was easy. It's not. The Vietnamese are uniquely xenophobic. They don't like foreigners. I mean, they'll take foreign tourist dollars today, but Vietnam didn't like the French, they didn't like the Japanese, they didn't like the Americans, and they don't like the Chinese. And every time the Chinese try going into Vietnam, they get their head handed to them. In Afghanistan, you're dealing with a society that has been independent and fighting foreigners since before Alexander the Great. Their national sport is a form of polo where they take the heads off their enemies, wrap it up to be the ball, and play it. The Afghans are truly savage, and conquering the place is impossible. Bless you. What made the American time there different is we weren't trying to conquer the place. We were trying to let the Afghans rule it. Unfortunately, the Taliban were able to convince enough Afghans that we were trying to conquer the place that they kept fighting. They also had the Pakistanis and the Russians and Chinese.
It's a slight problem that not a lot of them, but a lot of them are still tribal. Like,
yeah. Oh, they're totally tribal.
They don't know what a smartphone is. Like, they don't know what time is. Like, honestly.
No, they're living in ancient times.
Yeah.
And that's the way they like it. Don't try to change them, otherwise they'll shoot your helicopters down with Stinger missiles. Which happened to the Russians and at times to us.
Yeah, I wonder who gave them missiles.
Yeah, well, we did because the enemy of our enemy is our friend.
Yeah.
I still think fighting in Afghanistan against the Russians was righteous, but what it did is it gave us Bin Laden, it gave us Al Qaeda, and it gave us the Taliban.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Afghan culture, just like, it's so different because, like, you go into an Afghan house and the doorway is this tall. They don't have doors to begin with. It's just a door frame, it's just tall. It's all mud. You're going up the second floor, you walk in, and, you know, if you're like a soldier, it's like, oh, I got to clear that room. Except the door is this tall and it's on the ground. So you crawl in, you stand up, and you're face to face with a camel. And you're wondering, well, how'd the camel get there? They must have... I'm on the second floor. They built a house around the camel. But what? No, Afghanistan.
Look, you want to understand how weird it is. I'm sure you've seen it and read the book. Read or see the movie Lone Survivor. Because on the one hand, Marcus Luttrell and his unit was destroyed because they showed pity in Afghanistan, which is not something you should do. On the other hand, Afghani culture kept Luttrell alive when an entire Afghan village went to war to protect him because of their law of hospitality. Interesting stuff. Brutal movie, but brutal reality. Anyway, with this, Napoleon decides, the world is not enough. I'm going to take out the Russians. So he invades Russia with 500,000 men. Now, in your notes, you'll see a chart. It looks like this. Please wait. Yeah.
May I ask what the season was when he invaded?
I believe it was late spring, early summer, just like when Hitler invaded. Because both Hitler and Napoleon were used to conquering postage stamp-sized European countries. Even France isn't very large, not by the standards of the rest of the world. Russia is large. Russia has actually the most land area of any country on Earth. It has 7 or 8 time zones. So Napoleon invades from East Prussia with an army of basically, what does it say there? 800,000? No.
I thought it was 600.
It's between 500,000 and 600,000 men. It's basically 500,000 men. And his goal is Moscow. And what he's going to do is he's going to keep his army together and invade. The Russians placed their military under Marshal Mikhail Kutuzov. Kutuzov says, we're not fighting. We're withdrawing with scorched earth. The French have to live off the land. So for 100 miles to the north and south of their route of march, which is absolutely predictable, we're going to withdraw all our people, burn all our crops, destroy or take away all our eggs, all our meat. They will find nothing but scorched earth. This will make them hungry and desperate. And we will withdraw, and we will withdraw, and we will withdraw as long as is necessary. Why? Because in Russia, there's always more space. But Tsar Alexander insisted that for the honor of Russia, there's got to be at least one battle. So outside of Moscow, at a place called Borodino, the Russian army holds for just long enough to please Alexander's sense of honor, and then Kutuzov is allowed to withdraw again. So, by late summer, early fall, Napoleon's forces occupy Moscow, which is empty. And Napoleon says to himself, I've won the war. I've won the war. I captured the enemy capital. I beat their army in a battle. I've won. Where are they? When are they going to surrender? So he's pacing back and forth, getting angrier and angrier. Meanwhile, October comes and the snows, because it's Russia. France has a climate like Virginia. It's sort of hot and humid. It has very mild winters. Russia is like central Manitoba near Moscow. And as the winter comes in, first of all, Alexander and his army are east of Moscow. If the French continue to advance, they just go east to the Urals and beyond. There's no end to what they would do. They're not going to surrender. But Alexander and Kutuzov sent terrorists. They sent troops into Moscow secretly, and they burned the city. So Napoleon's men have to flee Moscow because there's no fire department, because they're gone, and because there's no fire hoses or anything like that, because it's the 1800s. So Napoleon's people, who are waiting for the Russian surrender, suddenly realize they're in the heart of Russia. Winter has come, and there's no food, and there's no shelter. We better go home. And now we have, and look at what happens to the charge. Look at what happens to the French army. The retreat from Moscow is a proverb for hell on earth. In the retreat from Moscow, the French army is withered. The winter kills huge numbers of Frenchmen and their allies. The Russians have some of the best cavalry on earth called Cossacks. And the Cossacks strike the edges of the French forces. Any Frenchman goes too far away from their central body to look for food or shelter, the Cossacks kill them. So the French are just being driven westward through ice, through snow, through cold, frostbite that literally can freeze men solid. After a while, even Napoleon's will breaks. He takes his cavalry and rides as quickly as he can back to East Prussia in Germany. Meanwhile, his foot soldiers are left to march their way out. So Napoleon entered Russia with over 500,000 men. He comes back with about 10,000. That's the retreat from Moscow. And there are lessons there, okay? I'm not saying that we'll never have to fight Russia. I hope we don't. But there are things you do other than invading from the West. There just are. It depends on what Putin does in Ukraine and elsewhere. I hope we don't have to. Hitler didn't learn from this. Well, he thought he did. Anyway, we'll talk about Hitler next time. So Napoleon's army is now not at all what it was, and Napoleon himself is a different man because of the retreat. So in 1813 and 14, the Russians march into East Prussia. And the Prussians rise up and join Russia. And the Austrians rise up and join the Russians. And in 1814, Paris is invested. Napoleon is overthrown. He's sent to Elba, an island in the Ligurian Sea off the coast of Italy. And there he is going to be imprisoned. But he'll have his own little navy and his own little kingdom and court. It's a way of Napoleon saving face, even though he's lost the war. However, he doesn't like it. And when the Russians go home in late 1814, early 15, Napoleon decides, okay, they've put an old, fat Bourbon king on the throne of France again. They're trying to turn back the clock. The Congress of Vienna is beginning to meet. We're going to have some fun. So Napoleon lands in southern France for what history will call the 100 Days. Napoleon marches north. The king sends Marshal Ney, one of Napoleon's field marshals, south with an army to arrest Napoleon. When the army sees Napoleon, they join him. Marshal Ney joins him. In fact, every set of troops that the king sends Napoleon's way join him. The king flees, Napoleon takes Paris, and the monster is back in the cockpit of Europe, threatening everyone. The Prussians and the English are the first to march against Napoleon. They're going to join their forces in Belgium, northeast of France. The Russians and the Austrians are coming, but they're going to be farther away. Napoleon says, we're not going to wait. We're going to strike the British and the Prussians, hopefully separately, and destroy each of them before the Austrians and Russians can get here. So Napoleon marches north to a place called Waterloo. At Waterloo, Napoleon's intent is to destroy the Duke of Wellington's army, which is British. But instead of trying to win the battle, the Duke of Wellington decides he's going to hold the high ground. Napoleon says he's trying to win this battle sitting on his ass. That's his language. Because Wellington's not taking any of his bait. Wellington's not trying to attack him because Wellington knows, and Napoleon knows, that Marshal Blucher and his Prussian army is approaching. The question is, will Marshal Blucher get there and defeat the French with the British? Or will part of Napoleon's force under Marshal Grouchy reach the French and help the French beat the English and then the Prussians? Well, at Waterloo, the French general finally falls apart. He's suffering from piles. He's suffering from terrible intestinal distress. He actually has to take a nap in the middle of the battle. While he's napping, his marshal, Ney, launches a cavalry attack without infantry support, which is stupid. Witness the tanks over there at Tiananmen Square. That's cavalry without infantry. It doesn't work. Ney gets destroyed. And then somebody, I think Napoleon finally says, the old guard must attack. And this is the heart of the French army, the old guard, the toughest, meanest SOBs in French uniform. And they march up, and the French cavalry that's left comes back. The British lines pull back into what are called fighting squares. The British, with men, make little rectangular forts. And in the center are the horses and the cannons. And around the edges are musketeers with fixed bayonets shooting. The French forces sweep through the fighting squares, and they're getting shot at by all sides. The French army breaks, the old guard breaks, the Prussians arrive, and Napoleon is defeated. This time, he's being sent far away. In the South Atlantic, there's a little speck of land called St. Helena. It's between Argentina and South Africa. That's where Napoleon is sent. He lives out the rest of his life, which I think is 7 or 8 years, in complete isolation on a tiny little rock in the middle of nowhere, South Atlantic. And at the Congress of Vienna, Prince Clemens von Metternich, the Austrian foreign minister, invites the victorious world and the French, the new French government, to make a peace that will last and that will prevent revolution. And that is the end of Unit 2. So tomorrow, your exam. I won't be making any more videos until after Christmas break. Questions, comments, thoughts? Yes?
Wait, so is the art and music not going to be on the...
What you should know in general about the music and the art. Jacques-Louis David, I've already shown you his art, revolutionary. It's called Neoclassical because it takes Roman ideas and brings them forward. As to music, we go from the Baroque period, which is Bach, which is beautiful but very mathematical, to Viennese classical, which is Mozart and Beethoven. And that is the progression during Unit 2. We go from Baroque, very mathematical, to Viennese classical, which is sort of a balance between passion on the one hand and mathematical precision and beauty on the other. If you want to know what Baroque music is, look at a minuet, simple minuet. If you want to know what Viennese classical is, listen to Beethoven's Ode to Joy. Bum 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 bum. Thank you for the reminder on that. But no, I don't have time to go through these, and those are the general things anyway.
Will we need to know the French revolutionary leaders?
Oh yes, the ones we talked about in class.
Is there like 120-ish questions on there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, and see you tomorrow.